A young nurse saved a dying Marine on the street. 24 hours later, she received a special invitation from the battalion headquarters. It was a calm Monday evening when Sarah got off her shift and was heading home from work. Little did she know her life was about to be changed forever. She was few blocks away from the hospital when she saw the growing crowd. She then increased her pace while trying to get through the crowd when she saw him, a man dressed in a military camouflage. Her breath caught in her throat. He was sprawled on the cold pavement, limbs askew, head turned at an awkward angle. The harsh glow of a street lamp spilled over his face, highlighting his pale skin, lips edged with the telltale blue of oxygen starvation. For a heartbeat, Sarah just stared. Her tired mind struggled to process it. The uniform, the limpness, the quiet horror in the eyes of the people gathered. Around him, bystanders fidgeted nervously, phones in hand, recording or calling 911, but no one dared touch him. The smell of exhaust and wet concrete mingled with the coppery scent of fear. She felt her heart thunder in her ears, the fog of a 12-hour shift burning away in an instant. "Move," she snapped, voice cracking like a whip as she pushed through the circle. Her bag slammed against her hip as she dropped to her knees beside him. His chest barely moved. She pressed her fingers to his neck, counting the sluggish, fading pulse. "Come on," she whispered fiercely. "Stay with me." Sarah didn't have time to think about how tired she was, how her feet ached, or how she'd promised herself she wouldn't be a nurse off duty. That didn't matter now. "Does anyone have Narcan?" she shouted to the crowd, eyes darting from face to blank face. She saw pity, horror, confusion, but no help. No one answered. Her jaw tightened. Damn it. She yanked her own battered kit from her bag. Always prepared. Always. Because 3 years ago, she'd watched her cousin overdose and die before paramedics arrived. She'd promised herself never again. With practiced precision, she tore open the nasal spray. Her hand shook only a little, the adrenaline surging so hard she thought she might faint. She tilted his head back gently, pressing the nozzle to his nostril. "Hang on, Marine," she muttered. She squeezed. Then she checked his pulse again. It fluttered weakly. She didn't hesitate, lacing her fingers, pressing the heel of her palm to his sternum. She started compressions. Push. Count. Push. Count. She didn't hear the gasps of the crowd anymore. Didn't see the smartphones pointed at her like weapons. All she heard was the ragged, wet silence in his lungs. Her own breath hissed in time with the rhythm. "Don't you dare die on me," she ground out, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. The smell of the street, the cold bite of the air against her raw knuckles, the heat in her arms from the compressions, it all blurred into one thing, saving him. Then he jerked. A spasm ran through his body, his back arching. He gagged, vomit spilling onto the pavement. Sarah didn't even flinch. She rolled him carefully onto his side, sweeping his mouth clear. "Easy. Easy. You're okay," she whispered, voice cracking. He sucked in a ragged, wheezing breath. His eyes fluttered open, glazed and uncomprehending, but alive. Alive. Her own chest heaved with relief. She didn't realize she was crying until the tears dripped onto her bloodied, scraped-up gloves. "Sarah." A paramedic's voice jolted her. She hadn't even heard the sirens. She looked up at the EMTs rushing in, their gurney rattling on the asphalt. "He overdosed," she croaked, voice hoarse. "I gave him Narcan." "CPR, you did great," the medic said, clapping her shoulder. She sagged backward onto her heels, arms hanging limp. Her hair was falling out of its tie, cheeks streaked with sweat and tears. Someone in the crowd was crying softly. Another was muttering prayers. A woman whispered, "She saved him. She really saved him." Sarah didn't want to hear it. She felt sick. She backed away shakily as the paramedics loaded the Marine onto the stretcher. His eyes met hers, unfocused but grateful, mouth working soundlessly. She just shook her head, blinking away tears. She felt everyone watching her, but she couldn't look at them. Hands trembling, she wiped her face with the back of her wrist and picked up her bag. She wanted to disappear. She didn't remember the rest of the walk home. She was bone-tired, beyond tired. Her legs felt like lead, every step sending pain shooting up her back. She smelled like sweat and vomit and antiseptic. When she finally reached her tiny studio apartment, she closed the door behind her and pressed her back against it, sliding slowly to the floor. The silence was deafening. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it. She stayed there for a long time, knees drawn up to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. The image of his face wouldn't leave her. the lifeless slackness of it, the way his chest refused to rise. And then, the moment it did, she scrubbed at her eyes, exhausted tears soaking her sleeves. Eventually, she crawled onto her narrow bed without even changing. She wanted sleep to claim her and erase everything. But she couldn't. Hours later, she sat upright in the dark, hugging a pillow. The glow of her phone screened the only light. The headline burned into her eyes. Nurse saves Marine's life on City Street. Heroic rescue caught on camera. A video auto-played below it. She watched herself drop to the ground. Watched herself shouting for Narcan. Watched his body jerk back to life. She saw the terror on her own face. Her phone buzzed with dozens of messages. Coworkers, family, journalists, strangers calling her a hero. She threw it down on the blanket. Her heart hammered. She couldn't shake the truth that no one else had moved. That he could have died right there in the street. Sarah buried her face in her hands and sobbed. She hadn't done it to be a hero. She'd done it because no one else would. And that knowledge weighed on her like the heaviest thing in the world. Sarah sat curled on the edge of her narrow sofa. The glow of her phone screened the only light in the apartment. It was well past midnight, but sleep wouldn't come. Not tonight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The Marine's face in that terrible moment. Blue lips, slack jaw, lifeless eyes. Then the violent convulsion as the Narcan took hold. The choking gasp that brought him back. The memory made her shiver. She pulled the old Afghan tighter around her shoulders, listening to the tick of the wall clock, the occasional distant wail of a siren. She was supposed to be asleep hours ago, recovering from that punishing shift, but exhaustion only sharpened the edges of her thoughts. She tapped her phone screen again, despite swearing she wouldn't. The headline was still there. Nurse saves Marine's life on sidewalk. Heroic rescue caught on video. A stranger's blurry cell phone footage played below. Sarah watched herself all over again. She saw her own face, strained, desperate. Heard herself screaming for Narcan. Saw the crowd filming instead of helping. Heard the sickening silence before the gasping breath. It played on a loop, mesmerizing and horrifying. She tossed the phone away onto the other cushion. It buzzed and vibrated again almost immediately. Text after text. Voicemails. Emails. Friends from college. Co-workers from the hospital. Even distant relatives she barely spoke to. Saw you on the news. Hero. So proud of you. Oh my God, are you okay? You're amazing. Sarah hugged her knees to her chest and stared at the wall. Amazing. That wasn't what it felt like. She felt raw, drained. In the moment, she hadn't thought about cameras or praise. She'd only thought, don't let him die. And the truth that no one else had even tried, that haunted her worst of all. Outside her window, the city lights cast strange shadows on the walls. Her apartment felt too small, too quiet, too full of ghosts. She rose and began pacing the floor, one end to the other. Her socks scuffed against the warped wooden boards. She caught a glimpse of herself in the cracked mirror by the door. Eyes rimmed red. Hair a tangled mess. Dark smudges of fatigue under her eyes. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. She had. With a shaking hand, she brushed the hair back from her forehead and took a deep breath. This is ridiculous, she muttered. He's alive. That's what matters. She pressed a palm flat to her chest, feeling her heart hammer. Does he have family? She wondered. Do they know? Did anyone call them? The thought twisted something deep inside her. She pictured a mother waiting by the phone, a wife watching the clock, a child asking where Daddy was. Did they know how close he'd come to dying on that dirty sidewalk with strangers watching like it was entertainment? Sarah wiped at fresh tears angrily. You did what you could, she reminded herself. You did what no one else would. But it didn't help. Hours passed. The city outside quieted down, traffic thinning, until even the buses stopped their low grumbling. The cold crept in through the old window frames. She wrapped the Afghan tighter, curling back onto the couch, phone still buzzing on the table. At some point, near dawn, sheer exhaustion finally dragged her under. Her dreams were fractured. She was kneeling on that pavement forever, pressing on his chest while people filmed. No matter how hard she pushed, he didn't breathe. She heard herself screaming for help, voice going hoarse. Then he opened his eyes and whispered thank you. She jerked awake at the sound. For a moment, she was disoriented, blinking in the gray pre-dawn light filtering through the blinds. Her mouth was dry. Her neck ached from sleeping twisted on the old sofa cushions. She rubbed at her eyes, trying to clear the cobwebs. Her heart still raced from the nightmare. That's when she heard it. A knock at the door. Sharp. Deliberate. She frowned. Who would come by this early? Her phone buzzed again. Some new text she didn't bother checking. The knock came again, harder this time. Sarah forced herself to stand, Afghan trailing around her shoulders like a cape. Her feet were freezing on the worn floor. She tried to smooth her hair down with one hand, but it was hopelessly tangled. Another knock. I'm coming, she croaked, voice raw with sleep and crying. She undid the deadbolt and slowly pulled the door open. What she saw made her freeze. Two Marines stood there in full dress uniform. Polished black shoes. Immaculate coats. Medals gleaming even in the dull morning light. Their expressions were solemn but kind. For a moment, Sarah couldn't even process it. She blinked at them, brain still fuzzed with sleep. Miss Sarah Collins? One asked formally. She cleared her throat, clutching the blanket tighter. Why, yeah, that's me. The Marine closest to her nodded. They both snapped into a crisp salute. Sarah flinched backward in surprise. Ma'am, the first said carefully, we're here on behalf of the battalion. She blinked again, confusion clouding her face. Battalion. The unit of the man you saved yesterday. Her heart thudded painfully. She swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she looked, hair wild, face puffy, wearing an old T-shirt under the blanket. The second Marine extended a formal envelope toward her. She didn't take it at first, just stared. It's for you, ma'am, he prompted gently. Hands trembling, she reached out and accepted it. The paper felt heavy, official. She tore it open clumsily, eyes darting over the words. It was embossed with the battalion seal. An invitation. A formal recognition ceremony. They wanted her at headquarters. Sarah's breath caught. She felt tears welling up again, unbidden. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak. I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? The first Marine met her gaze squarely. Because you saved one of ours, he said simply. Silence hung in the air. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. The world felt too big, too strange. Yesterday, she'd been just a nurse on her way home. Now there were Marines at her door, and they were saluting her. She sniffed hard, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, ma'am, the Marine replied kindly. Just be there. They both saluted again before turning to leave. Sarah stood in the doorway, envelope clutched to her chest, watching them go. The morning light was creeping over the city now, warm and golden despite the cold. She closed the door slowly, leaning her forehead against the wood. And finally let the tears fall freely. He had family. They knew. They cared. And they wanted her to know she mattered, too. Sarah woke well before dawn, the invitation lying on the nightstand like it was watching her. She hadn't really slept. Even after the two Marines left the day before, she'd sat for hours at the tiny kitchen table, staring at the embossed seal on the letter, rereading it again and again until the words blurred. You are hereby invited to battalion headquarters for formal recognition of your heroic actions. Heroic. The word felt too big. Heavy. Now, early morning light crept through the blinds, painting her small studio in pale stripes. She rubbed her eyes and sighed, pulling herself up from bed. The place was a mess, blankets on the floor, take-out containers she hadn't thrown out. She stepped around them numbly. She had no idea what to wear. For long minutes she just stood in front of the closet, heart thumping. She didn't own anything fancy, just a couple of dresses she wore to weddings, a black skirt she'd used for job interviews, her usual scrubs. She ran a hand over the fabric of the skirt. Too businesslike. Too formal. Finally, she chose a simple blue dress, modest, clean lines. She ironed it carefully on the kitchen counter, biting her lip every time her hands shook. She showered quickly, scrubbing her hair and face until her skin turned pink. She caught herself examining her reflection in the foggy mirror, eyes red and tired, dark circles smudged beneath them. She thought about makeup, but it felt dishonest. She wanted them to see her exactly as she was. When she was done, she sat on the edge of the couch in silence, hands clasped tight in her lap. Outside, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbling down side streets, dogs barking in apartment courtyards, early morning laughter echoing in the halls. But inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. She startled at the knock on the door. She stood quickly, heart leaping into her throat. She smoothed her dress with damp palms and opened up. It wasn't the two Marines from the day before. This time it was a single, older Marine in dress blues, his silver hair cropped close, rows of ribbons on his chest. "Miss Collins?" "Yes," she managed, voice cracking. He nodded once, solemn. "Vehicle's waiting." She grabbed her bag automatically. He offered his arm, but she shook her head and followed him down the hall. They stepped out into the cool morning air. Parked at the curb was a matte black military SUV. A driver in uniform opened the door for her wordlessly. She hesitated, glancing back at her building graffiti-tagged, cracked steps, weeds pushing up through the sidewalk. Then she squared her shoulders and climbed in. The door shut with a solid, final thud. Inside, the silence was thick. She sat stiffly, hands folded tight, feeling the seatbelt dig into her side. The older Marine settled in beside her and gave the driver a nod. They pulled away slowly from the curb. For a while, no one spoke. The city slid past the windows, busy intersections, coffee shops belching steam into the cold, mothers tugging kids along crosswalks, sleepy commuters huddled at bus stops. Sarah watched it all, her thoughts spinning. What was she supposed to say when she got there? "Thank you for the invitation. I'm not a hero." Her throat felt dry. She risked a glance at the older Marine. His expression was unreadable, eyes fixed on the middle distance. "Is he okay?" she blurted finally, voice cracking. He turned to her, blinking. "The Marine you saved?" She nodded, gripping her bag tighter. A slow smile spread across his face, gentle, sad. "He's stable. He's alive because of you." Sarah pressed her lips together to stop them trembling. She looked down at her lap. "Good," she whispered. They didn't speak after that. The city thinned out as they drove. Brick apartments gave way to open lots, then suburban homes, then long empty stretches of road bordered by neat fences. The silence in the car felt absolute, pressing on her ears. At last, the vehicle turned onto a wide avenue lined with tall, arching trees. Ahead loomed iron gates topped with a gleaming military insignia. The driver slowed as they approached. A sentry stepped forward, crisp in his uniform. He peered into the window, nodded smartly, then saluted. The gate swung open with mechanical precision. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought it would bruise her ribs. They rolled forward onto the base. Neat lawns spread out on either side, flags fluttering in the breeze. Low brick buildings lined the roads, each one immaculate, purposeful. She caught glimpses of uniformed Marines marching in formation on distant fields, their boots pounding in perfect rhythm. She swallowed hard. They drove slowly through the complex, finally pulling up in front of a wide, imposing building with stone steps and heavy oak doors. The vehicle stopped. The driver got out first, opening her door with stiff formality. Sarah sat frozen for half a breath. Then she forced her legs to move, swinging them out onto the pavement. Her shoes clicked on the concrete as she stood up. She smoothed her dress one last time, palms sweaty against the fabric. Ahead of her, lined on either side of the walkway, were Marines in full dress uniform, standing at rigid attention. Rows and rows of them, their eyes forward, their posture perfect. A gust of wind caught her hair, tugging it loose from the careful braid she'd tried to tie it in. She felt a flush creep up her neck. "They're all here for me," she realized. Her knees wobbled. For a second, she wanted to turn around and run back to the car. But the older Marine was beside her now, nodding once. "Ready, Miss Collins?" She swallowed hard. No, she wasn't ready at all. But she nodded anyway. He offered her his arm. She hesitated, then took it. They began walking forward. The sound of their steps on the pavement was swallowed in the silence of the lined-up Marines. Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead, trying to stop her hands from shaking. At the top of the steps stood the battalion commander. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed. Rows of medals shone on his chest. His face was grave but kind. As she approached, he took a step forward. When she stopped in front of him, heart hammering, he extended his hand. "Miss Collins," he said, voice low but carrying easily. "On behalf of every Marine in this battalion, I want to thank you." She hesitated, staring at his hand. Her fingers twitched, then closed around his. His grip was warm, firm, steadying. He met her eyes without blinking. "You acted when others froze," he continued. "You saved one of our own." Her throat closed. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. He didn't rush her. The wind rustled the flags behind them. She felt the weight of all the eyes on her, rows of Marines standing at attention. The gravity of it hit her like a wave. She wasn't just a nurse who'd done her job. She was the reason one of them was alive. She sucked in a shaking breath, forcing words out. I just didn't want him to die, she managed, voice breaking. The commander nodded once, solemn. And because of you, he didn't. Silence. The two of them stood there, the entire battalion watching. Sarah blinked back tears, chest rising and falling raggedly. She'd wanted to hide, to downplay it. But here, among these men and women who lived and breathed sacrifice, there was no room for that. They saw her. They respected her. And for the first time since it happened, she felt like maybe she deserved it. Sarah stood in the foyer of the battalion headquarters, heart thudding so loudly in her ears she could barely hear the polite murmurs of the Marines guiding her inside. The doors ahead were heavy oak, polished so bright they reflected the overhead lights like glass. One Marine opened the door for her, nodding once. She stepped in. The large ceremonial hall swallowed her immediately. Light poured through tall windows onto polished floors. Rows of chairs lined either side of a broad aisle, filled with Marines in crisp dress blues, local officials in suits, and a scattering of reporters clutching notebooks and cameras. Conversations hushed the moment she entered. Dozens of faces turned toward her. She froze. A wave of heat flushed her cheeks. Her hands felt clammy, gripping her purse so tightly the leather creaked. Breathe, she ordered herself. She forced one foot forward, then the other. A Marine escort stepped up beside her, offering a quiet, reassuring nod. This way, ma'am, he murmured. She followed him down the center aisle, every step sounding impossibly loud in the sudden hush. She caught glimpses of the faces watching her. Young Marines, older veterans, stern officers with rows of ribbons gleaming on their chests. A few inclined their heads respectfully as she passed. At the front of the hall, a wide stage rose a couple of steps above the floor. On it stood the battalion commander. Tall, broad-shouldered, ramrod straight even at rest. His uniform was immaculate. Rows of medals glittered on his chest. As she approached, he stepped forward, offering his hand. Sarah swallowed hard and took it. His grip was warm and strong. He held it for a moment longer than necessary, eyes locking on hers with grave sincerity. Welcome, Miss Collins, he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. He squeezed her hand gently, then let go, guiding her up onto the stage. He turned to face the gathered audience. The hush deepened to complete silence. He rested his hands on the podium, eyes sweeping over the room. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice calm but firm, we're gathered today to recognize an act of extraordinary courage. Sarah felt her knees wobble. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her to hide the trembling. She scanned the crowd and saw faces rapt with attention. The commander continued. 2 days ago, one of our Marines suffered a medical emergency in the middle of the city. He collapsed on the sidewalk. Dozens of people witnessed it. He paused. His eyes found Sarah's again. Most of them chose to do nothing. A murmur rippled through the hall. Sarah lowered her gaze, face burning. But one person, the commander went on, voice rising with quiet intensity, did not turn away. Even though she'd just finished a long overnight shift. Even though she was exhausted. Even though it wasn't her responsibility. Sarah's throat tightened painfully. She pushed through that crowd, he continued. She recognized the signs of an overdose immediately, and she used her own Narcan kit to revive him. She performed CPR in the middle of a cold city street while bystanders filmed her. His voice broke a little. She brought him back. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut against the sting of tears. The commander turned fully toward her. Sarah Collins, he said, voice softening, you saved one of ours. You gave him back to us. And for that, we can never repay you. Silence. A heavy, charged silence. She could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She tried to speak, but no words came. The commander reached beside the podium and lifted a framed certificate. It was beautifully inscribed, the battalion seal stamped in brilliant color. He held it out to her solemnly. She took it with shaking hands. Her fingers brushed his for a second, grounding her. He didn't let go right away. When he did, she thought she might drop it. She tightened her grip instead. Then he turned and held out a small, shining object, a battalion coin. Thick, heavy in his palm. Engraved with the battalion insignia on one side, the words "for valor" on the other. A hush fell over the room that felt like reverence. He pressed it into her hand. This is our tradition, he said quietly. Our thanks. Our respect. Sarah stared down at it. The weight of the coin felt immense. She blinked rapidly, fighting the tears welling up. Thank you, she managed, voice cracking badly. The commander didn't look away. Don't thank me, he said. You earned it. Then he stepped back. The room was still silent, until a voice called out, raw and cracked. Sarah. She jerked, whipping her head around. At the edge of the stage, supported by a fellow Marine, was the man she'd saved. He looked fragile, pale. He wore his dress blues, though the jacket was a little loose on his gaunt frame. His eyes were wet with tears. He took a shaking step forward. The Marine at his side steadied him carefully. He stopped just in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's vision blurred completely. He cleared his throat, voice cracking with emotion. I don't know how to say thank you, he rasped. She shook her head violently, tears spilling freely now. You don't have to, she whispered. He tried to speak again, but choked on a sob. The commander put a steadying hand on his shoulder. The Marine wiped at his eyes furiously, struggling for composure. Then, with painful slowness, he straightened as much as he could, and saluted. His hand trembled, but it was a perfect salute. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. She didn't know what to do. She clutched the certificate and coins so tightly they bit into her palms. So she did the only thing she could. She took a half step forward and wrapped her arms around him. He stiffened, then sagged into the embrace, shoulders shaking. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone started to clap. It spread slowly, building until the entire hall was on its feet, applause echoing off the high walls, rising and rising in a crashing wave. Sarah felt it like thunder in her bones. She buried her face in the Marine's shoulder, sobbing freely. And for the first time since it happened, she let herself believe it was okay to cry. They didn't see her as weak. They saw her as one of them. And that changed everything. Sarah sat quietly in the back seat of the car as it rolled away from the battalion headquarters, the weight of the ceremony still pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She could feel the battalion coin in her palm, heavy and cold, the engraved letters biting gently into her skin. She turned it over and over, the metal catching the gray light that seeped through the window. For a while, neither she nor the driver spoke. The silence was almost reverent, filled only with the soft hum of the engine and the muted crackle of the tires on the old, worn road. She glanced up and met the driver's eyes in the mirror. He held her gaze for a respectful moment, then looked back at the road, giving her the gift of privacy. She rested her head against the seat and exhaled shakily. The leather creaked beneath her. She closed her eyes but couldn't shut out the images flooding her mind. The Marine standing in rows at attention, the commander's grave voice calling her by name, the Marine she'd saved saluting her with tears running down his face. The applause that crashed over her like a wave, making her feel seen in a way she'd never expected, never asked for. She blinked back tears and forced her gaze to the window. The city was sliding by, slow and blurred, buildings rising and falling in steady rhythm. She watched familiar streets pass. A diner she'd eaten at after long shifts, a pharmacy she'd stopped at for cheap coffee, the little park with the rusted swings where families played on weekends. Normal places. Ordinary. She turned the coin in her palm again, pressing it to her lips before lowering it to her lap. I didn't do it to be thanked. The thought trembled inside her like a confession. She saw the Marine's face again as he'd hugged her, his voice cracking as he said he didn't know how to thank her. She hadn't known what to say then either. Words felt clumsy, insufficient. Her fingers closed around the coin. You did it because no one else did. That was the truth she carried like a stone in her gut. She thought of the crowd on the sidewalk that day, filming with their phones, stepping back instead of forward. She thought of her own feet moving before her brain even caught up, exhaustion evaporating in the face of sheer need. The driver glanced back in the mirror again, his eyes gentle. She gave him the smallest of smiles, watery and tired. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. When the car finally pulled up in front of her apartment building, she hesitated before opening the door. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded once. Take care, ma'am. She stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk and closed the door gently behind her. The car rumbled away, leaving her standing there in the chilled afternoon air. She looked up at the peeling paint of the old building, the broken buzzer that never worked right, the window where she'd sat so many nights watching the world go by. She took a deep breath, straightened her dress, and went inside. The apartment was dark and small, and exactly the same. But she wasn't. She set the coin down on the little table by the door like it was something sacred. Then she sank onto the